All right, let's go to David C. Turner. He is a Black Lives Matter organizer and joins me now from Los Angeles. Great to have you on the program. As an organizer for Black Lives Matter, when you look at these protests that have been going on for over a week now and much of the violence that has happened, what response do you have? And do you think the message is still getting across, even though much of the news coverage has focused on that violence and looting?
Well, first off, first, thank you for having me. I definitely want to acknowledge that. First, I want to, I think, redirect the conversation. When we're talking about this idea of violence, right? We're talking about this idea of what it means to take a life or to take property or to take things. The police departments around the country have systemically done that to communities of color, Black communities specifically. To give you an example of what this looks like, from 2013 until 2019, um, law enforcement here in Los Angeles County have killed 463 people, right? In addition to that, right, there have been over 5,633 filed complaints against LAPD alone in the span of 2 years.
Hmm.
I think oftentimes when we talk about this idea of trying to condemn protesters for their violence, we don't look at the type of violence that people have to live with and deal with every day. So I think instead of condemning the violence of protesters, we need to condemn the violence of the system that has pushed our people over the edge in the first place.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for pointing that out. In regards to the upgrade in the charges against the fired police officer Derek Chauvin and then the arrests of the other former officers involved, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I certainly think that it's important to send a strong message, right? There oftentimes is this notion or this idea that there is one singular bad apple, right? That
Mhm.
there's a bad apple cop and not a problem with the broader system that allows for policing to harm communities, right? And in addition to that, there is complacency, what we call the blue wall of silence here in the States, right? That allows for, quote unquote, good cops to be silent when they see harm happening and don't intervene and don't interject when they know that something can be done. So I think it sends a strong message, right, that the other three were charged, and I think this presents a challenge to other law enforcement officers across the country to begin stepping forward. If you really want to be a quote unquote good cop, then you wouldn't hide behind that blue wall of silence while the people who you call coworkers are out here harming entire communities.
Mhm. When it comes to lasting change and ending the problem of systemic racism in America, why do you think it always has to be a tragedy such as the killing of George Floyd to raise this issue of racism in America and bring out protests like this?
Well, I think policing is, especially here in the United States, is one of the longest lasting institutions that has its roots in chattel slavery. Policing, again, started as slave patrols, right? Started as the idea of, caging and keeping other human beings from running away. And that particular legacy hasn't changed. We see here in these protests, law enforcement that are much more interested in protecting property than protecting people. Where do we think this idea comes from, right? So when we talk about these tensions between law enforcement and Black communities, right? Like, yes, that always brings up the systemic racism question. Another thing, too, I think that we have to address is that oftentimes in many city governments, law enforcement eats up half, if not more, of most.
Oh, unfortunately, I think we've lost our connection with David C. Turner, but we want to thank him for his time and sharing his thoughts with us about the ongoing protests over the killing of George Floyd.